This is the Northwest Tank Line Super Bowl show coming to you from Radio Row. We're at the Mandalay Bay Hotel. Of course, it is hosting Radio Row, Super Bowl 58 between the Kansas City Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. A man who is covering the game is former NFL quarterback, now working for ESPN, the one and only Dan Orlovsky. Dan, thanks for doing this. We appreciate it.
It's a pleasure to be with you guys.
And you know what? We're sitting there talking with one of your guys from ESPN, and we said, hey, well, we'll talk UConn football because UConn football has been a haven. Or pardon me, I should say the CFL has been a haven for UConn football.
I remember that a little bit, yeah.
I'm going to go through the roll call right now.
Can I give you some names first of guys that I think that I played with?
Okay.
That at least played there. I don't know if they're playing anymore.
Okay.
O'Neal Wilson.
Okay.
Danny Devereaux.
Devereaux, I remember the name. Yep.
Larry Taylor.
Larry Taylor was in Toronto.
Sean Merriman.
Merriman was a UConn guy. Okay.
There's another guy.
I've got some here.
Okay, fire
This is
them
the
away.
list on the CFL website.
Okay.
Martin Bedard.
Martin Bedard was the name I was thinking about.
Long snapper.
Yep.
Jeremy Davis, John Delahunt, Vontae Diggs, Omar Fort, Reuben Frank, John Green, Jesse Joseph, Junior Joseph, Alex Mateus, Hergy Mayalo just signed in Hamilton, B.J. McBride, David Pindell, Larry Taylor, Noel Thomas II.
Some players.
I'm telling you, it's like a haven for you guys.
Yeah. Part of it was because when I was at least playing, you know, when you're a smaller program trying to go beat bigger programs, you're trying to find kids that are maybe a year or two away from what they're actually going to be, you know, and that was the recruiting that our coaching staff did and the development. And they found kids that, you know, were maybe from Canada and came down and played and, you know, that were overlooked by some of the other schools in the States, but that were physically talented, and maybe they started playing football later, you know, or whatnot, and they had the physical tools, and our coaches did a good job of figuring that out.
I think a lot of times, too, is, you know, you look at size, especially the size factor. If a guy's not big enough to play, say, at a Power 5 school, he'll go to maybe to a smaller school. But those smaller type speed players play well in the Canadian game, that body type, right? You can be an outside rush guy at, say, 235 or 220, whereas in the NFL you might be considered too light, right?
Yeah.
So those players that maybe the NFL really doesn't look at because they don't meet certain parameters, those are the guys that kind of
it makes a lot of sense. The style of the ball is different.
Yeah,
it's also funny. We've seen a lot of this elements of the CFL kind of creep its way into the NFL over the past year or two when it comes to some of the offensive sets and the motions and the pre-snap stuff.
Well, you look at some of the coaching staffs, a lot of Canadian influence. I mean, Kingsbury has some Canadian CFL background. Taylor in Cincinnati. I mean, you can go on and on.
Yeah.
And then, you know, you look at certain staffs have guys. Marcus Brady just, I believe, got hired by the Chargers.
Correct.
Their passing game coordinator. There's a guy with Canadian experience. So it's interesting seeing kind of some of those things that you see in the CFL migrate to the National Football League. All right, let's get into it. First off, man, that was impressive at the Pro Bowl skills. I don't know what Stephen Smith's chirping about. I mean, first off, you got to deal with Stephen A. Smith and, like, Mad Dog. I love Dog. I've known him for ages, going back to the 94 Cup Finals between the Canucks and the Rangers. But Stephen A. Smith averaged 1.5 points per game at Salem or wherever he played, and he's chirping you? Yeah. Come on, man.
I always say this, one of the benefits of playing quarterback as a young kid, obviously high school, college, you're used to people chirping at you. You know, it came with that position, so I'm used to it. That was fun last week. You know, I started to feel bad just because, the guys that were down there, because everyone's like, you beat all the guys that were down there. First of all, those guys are so much better than I ever was. And second of all, they're all so cool to me, you know? And so I don't ever want those cats to feel like Orlovsky's trying to one-up us or anything. And I know they probably don't, but I'd never even want to enter into that realm. But, you know, for me, I've got triplet 12-year-old boys, and kids are a little different nowadays, you know, and I'm blessed. My kids are great. But they got some friends that like to run their mouth a little bit, and, you know, I got to check them at sometimes. And so that was, for me, it was a little bit like, make sure all your knucklehead friends, you know, like, watch that.
Do you know that's one of the things you talk to athletes, and it's really hard for them sometimes, is they talk about their careers, and they go, I wish my kids could have seen me in my prime.
100%.
Right? You know what I mean? And that's why some guys might stick around a little bit longer, because now when they started, they might have been a newborn. Now the kid's like maybe 8 or 9 or 10, and they get to see dad play at that level, and they actually get to experience him as an athlete.
Yeah, I mean, my kids, again, they're great kids, but sometimes they make comments, and I just laugh, you know, because perfect example, one of my sons came home a year ago, and they said, Dad, Mr. Schultz, their gym teacher, he's like, you should see him throw. He could probably throw as good, if not better than you. And I was just like, jeez, guys. You guys are the dumbest, man. I love you too. So yeah, there is an element. I wish, my kids know me way more as a person on ESPN than they ever did as a professional football player and whatnot. And so, that's just sometimes the reality of life. But I was telling this to Mad Dog because Mad Dog, and I had a little 3-minute thing this week and whatnot. I told Mad Dog I don't ever have to justify my career to anybody.
No.
Like, that's the beautiful thing for me is I'm maxed out. Like I defied all the odds and I knew what it takes. So that's why, like, when people say something, I don't care what you say. Like I did it.
Been there, done that.
Yeah. So
Dan Orlovsky from ESPN is our guest for a couple more minutes. Take off your ESPN hat if you don't mind for a second. But your former team, the Lions, so close to getting to this big game. As a former Lion, what did it feel like seeing that game between San Francisco and Detroit?
Overjoyed for the season for Detroit. I was there when we were not good, and those fans still, more often than not, hung with you. And you always felt two things. One, if they could ever win, this place would be sick. And two, you felt bad that you weren't good enough for them to have the pride of a winning team. So to watch the team win this year was amazing. Watching that game in the first half, I felt Detroit was going to win the game. I felt the game was going to go like the first half did, that they would physically just, hey, here it comes, you can't stop us type of thing. And then as the second half started going, it just felt like the third quarter they got choked out. It was just this snowball. And while there was part of me going, there's so much to be happy about this year, you don't know in this league if you can get back. Mm-hmm. You just don't. You can think you can.
Campbell talked about that afterwards.
You just don't know. And you sit there and go, my goodness, that might be the best opportunity that group ever has. You don't know. Hope it's not. And that was as happy as you were then ultimately just as sad that, you guys were so close and you could have beaten Kansas City.
Dan Orlovsky from ESPN, our guest for a couple more minutes. 2 questions before we let you go. And, man, when I look at the game from any perspective, and having coached it at the college level and knowing what you try to do on defense, it's about creating doubt. Sure. Right? I mean, that's the big thing. Everyone talks about schemes, this and that, but the bottom line of all those schemes and everything you try to do is you're trying to confuse the opposition.
Sure.
So how do you create doubt with Patrick Mahomes, number one, and how do you try to create some doubt with Brock Purdy when they're up over that center?
Yeah, I think the answer to Patrick is you don't get Patrick to doubt stuff. You get everybody else to. And you try to make them make mistakes. You're not going to fool Patrick. He's seen it all already, and he knows people try to throw Star Wars at him. So you're trying to like Baltimore had a couple moments where they confused the offensive line a little bit. You confused the back and protection a little bit. There's been moments where teams have been able to confuse the receivers, and that's why they haven't been on the same page. So you're trying to confuse the others more so than Patrick. The thing that you can do to Patrick, it's hard. You got to say, we're going to play this game from the 60th minute forward, not the first minute on. Can we get that game? Can you get that game to the 60th minute with your team a chance to win the game? And the only way you do that is you make Patrick play boring, out-grind football. Guys that are uber-talented, they don't want to do that. And see if he can make a mistake or see if he can beat a tackle. That's what you can do to him. For Brock, I think the great thing about Brock is, in part in the Shanahan tree in this offense, is you get so confident in the play call. That's why so many of these guys, quarterbacks that play in this offense, they're so convicted when they play. Back foot hits the ground, here comes a rip. Brock Purdy, Tua Tagovailoa, Kirk Cousins, because the plays are so cool and they're so good and you have such conviction in them. Can you get him to second guess what his eyes are telling him? If you can do that, then you got a shot.
All right, the one question we ask all our guests, forget about picking a team, this and that, but what's the big question that you want to see answered on Sunday? What's that one storyline or narrative that Dan Orlovsky looks at and go, man, I wonder how this works out? Sunday.
Is Kyle Shanahan going to go into this game and say, I want to establish the run early? Because if he does that, I think you're setting Brock Purdy up to fail. Does Kyle Shanahan go, you know what, Steve Spagnuolo, defense coordinator of Kansas City, I know you want to stop the run, and you're good at it, and I know you guys want to play man coverage. I'm going to take all that. You committing to stop the run with people or pressure, and you being an aggressive defense, and you want to play hands-on man football, and I'm going to hurt you with it early on, and I'm going to run a ton of misdirection. I'm going to run a ton of bootleg. I'm going to get my quarterback out on the perimeter to get his athleticism into the game. I'll run a ton of pick and rub routes off of that action to get easy throws for him, rather than than sitting there going, I don't want to burden him with this, free him up. And I'll be very interested to see if Kyle does that.
Dan, great stuff. Thanks so much for stopping by. Continued success with ESPN. You're killing it. And go UConn Huskies.
Thank you, sir.